Welcome to the Council of Moms, where we get together, a lot of moms from different backgrounds, with different parenting styles, with different likes, dislikes, different experiences, and we all come together and talk about how we really feel about everything. Today on the Council of Moms, we're going to be talking about some specific ways to help each other with the hopes of creating more empathy. And we hope that you will take away from the Council of Moms this spirit of, oh yeah, when we are vulnerable and share what we really think and our real experiences with each other, we not only help ourselves, but we can help other people too. So we're changing the conversations that we have. It's not about comparison, it's about connection. So today I'm asked everyone on the Council of Moms to introduce themselves and to share a favorite gift that they've received as a mom. I thought we'd give it a little positive spin. They're macaroni necklaces and, what collages made with buttons. Like these are priceless items, right? I'm going to start by saying a few years ago, my now 23-year-old Owen created these sort of subway poster artwork, so huge artwork for my late husband and I, one of a chicken and one of Satan, because those were the roles that we were playing in the play where we met. So where our whole family started is my husband and I were in this play. He was Satan and I was a chicken on Noah's Ark, of course. And so Owen made these posters with this gorgeous art. And it was just kind of one of those moments where it was beautiful, like something that I would pay money for. And then you realized, oh, my kid, they made this, and you have that feeling. And then it also contributed to like our family culture of like, oh, this is where our family started. Anyway, when I have them on my wall and they bring me a lot of joy. That's one of my favorite gifts. And we also have...
I'm Brooke Hoopes, mother to 6. Our kids range from about 8 to 20. And the first thought that I had was our last baby, I ended up finding out the day before that I had to go unmedicated. That was an unplanned. I had some blood work results that were not good. Anyway, so I was like reading hypnobirthing books the night before. Anyway.
I have never heard of that.
It was crazy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I got ready to go to the hospital, and my kids had written me a note that said, "Mom, you've got this." And one of my daughters had taped like 2 or 3 quarters with Scotch tape that said, "Get yourself a treat at Days Market when you're done." Our little grocery market in the neighborhood.
That is the
And that was a
cutest.
little treasure. Like my kids were behind me in my hard moment.
Wow.
That is cute. I'm Emilie Campbell. I'm a mom of 3, and one of the best gifts I've received as a mom, but not from my children, was when some friends, other moms, gifted me like a package of 3 at-home massages.
Oh, that's
One of the best gifts I've ever received. It was so needed and useful and felt so luxurious, and I wasn't gonna, pay money for that for myself. So super thoughtful. Loved it. Still loving it.
perfect.
I'm Gina James, and I'm a mom of 4, and my kids always bring me flowers ever since they were little. And I'm talking like pick the neighbor's tulips flowers.
Yeah.
But it's so cute that they all have done it. And just as recently as a couple weeks ago, we went on a hike, and I have this like man cub of a child right now who's just grown about 6 inches in the last 6 months, this my 15-year-old son. And we were just on a little hike, and he just picked a flower, and he's like, "Here, Mom, I want you, this is for you." And it was just the sweetest thing. They always just bring me and I like it. They're not huge, but it's just they're bringing me things that remind them of me. And so just like I think, oh, well, I'm on your mind. So I think that's a sweet gift.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for being here. We like to have these kinds of conversations. I was talking to a friend the other day about a problem, and I wondered if, and she asked me like a hard question, like, what would you do in this situation? And the details aren't necessarily important. We've all had those like kind of conversations with our friends. And I just had to stop for a second, and I was like, because I wanted to really like answer it consciously. And you know what's so interesting is that I said, just let me think about that, and I want to get back to you, because we were messaging on Marco Polo, which is a great app where you can kind of like talk it through instead of texting it through, when you live far away. And it's funny because while I was thinking about it, mulling it over, I found myself thinking, well, what would she think about it? Well, what would she think about it? Like I was thinking about all my network of mom friends who might answer differently than me or have a different idea or a new idea so that I could give my friend like the best advice. And I caught myself
Smart.
doing that because I knew that we would be recording the Council of Moms. And I thought, isn't that so interesting? Because what a benefit that is to not just have your own experience when you're trying to mother, but that you have the experiences of those who you talk to and create in your circle. And so, this is my push for creating your own Council of Moms when you're creating friendship groups that of different generations, ages, backgrounds, different kinds of marriages, different kinds of relationships, different
Super
kinds
smart.
of kids,
Yeah.
problems, strengths, weaknesses, likes, dislikes. That variety has served me so much in my life that I really feel like I want to give a huge plug to it. And where better to do that than here on the Council of Moms? So thank you for being part of that, because you guys came into my mind as well. So I feel like we've got a real powerhouse conversation coming up. So I really want to take this seriously. So we reached out to our listeners, and I love the Lisa Show community. And we asked, what kind of questions do you have about parenting? And as I was going through them, I'm always looking for what they're really asking and how to sort of clump together a lot of questions so that, because there's themes that come up that everyone is really worried about. Okay, so this is the one that I landed on for this particular group. I really love it because I do find that the Council of Moms and my friends, with different perspectives are in my head. So I thought, let's bring that to this particular question, and it's this. How are you supposed to react, or how do you react to others' interpretation of your parenting? So we got, I'll give you a second. This is actually like from 3 different questions, because one was like, hey, my mother-in-law is constantly criticizing and she's like super involved. How do I, set boundaries while still being kind? And another one talked about how like, other moms seem to have it all together. I seem to not be able to. And it's kind of exhausting sort of trying to keep up. And then the third question that folds into this one is the idea of friends. Like, how can I find other friends that kind of like support me in this? But all of it had to do with this interpretation. Like, we don't mother in a vacuum. And which is great and
We
horrible.
mother with a vacuum often.
Yeah.
But,
Several different kinds. But how do you react to others' interpretations of your mothering? And you can take it, with any relationship. How do you interpret that question?
I used to get really offended, like personally, internally. Like I tried not to show that I was offended, but I was like, are you telling me, how somebody's like, oh, well, this is what I do with my children. And when they say it that way, you're like, well, are you putting down what I'm doing with my children by telling me what you do with your children?
Or are you sharing?
Or are you sharing? And most of the time I'm like, I'm not buying your just like, oh, this is just a good idea I've had. And that really affected me as a young mother, especially when it comes, I think of the so much stress I had about whether or not or which preschool to send my children to.
Oh, yeah.
In my neighborhood, there was this preschool. Everybody went to this one preschool, but you had to like get on the wait list. I mean, it's like what you see in all dumb sitcoms and stuff, that they have to get in this wait list to get in this preschool. I didn't know anything about it. Plus, it was really expensive and I couldn't afford it.
I was going to say,
I couldn't afford it.
It's
Some
such
of
a
my friends could
privileged
afford it.
dilemma.
Right.
And I'll tell you what, the difference was, and now I have hindsight. So my kids didn't go to that fancy preschool and whatever. Looking back, their children were not any better off academically or prepared for kindergarten than my kids were. and some were worse. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, isn't that horrible?
No.
I still think that. This is how
true.
it's the trauma that stayed with me. And so I think for me, I just have gotten more comfortable with the choices I've made as a parent as I've been a parent longer, that I don't really care what anybody else thinks, because guess what? They don't know my children like I know my children. So I have to always remind myself, well, that's great for their children. And that's great for maybe how they were raised and what they're bringing to the table as a parent. But for my children and with my experiences, these are the things I'm doing. And so I try to have confidence and remind myself of that. And the older I've become as a parent, the less I care what.
I think that's interesting because I think that's going to be a theme, Oh, you get older, you don't care or whatever. But I do.
It's not that I don't
20
care.
years. That's 20 years,
Yeah.
like between, I got to get into this preschool to be like, yeah, I don't care. And they were fine. But in that 20 years, like what was helpful for you to get from A to B?
Knowing my children and knowing and serving, parenting or serving my children. I mean, that's what parenting is, right? Serving my children in the best way for each of them, because they went to different preschools based on what I felt like they needed too.
You can't.
And we
parent.
never went to preschool.
And I never. Well, and one of my daughters went to preschool, and it started in September. And at Christmas time, the preschool teacher goes, maybe we should just have a little break for a little bit.
Oh, no.
She was such a nightmare.
Really?
Yeah. And so
Was
I
it-
was like, you know who it was.
Okay. my
And
niece.
so I was just like, you know what?
Yeah.
You don't need preschool. So December till she went to kindergarten, she just stayed home. We tried. It wasn't great. And so we did our own things. And she's great.
She's one of your best ones.
She is what
They're all the best
I have 4 ones that are great. I only have 4 children, so that works out well. But yeah, I mean, you just do what they need.
Yeah, and it's so individual, right?
It's so individual.
Yeah, you can't parent all your kids the
No.
same way, and
But that preschool teacher was judging my parenting.
Yeah, she was.
Which is fine. She's really
Was
nice.
she young, and did she have any kids?
No,
yet?
she had like older kids,
stop it.
but she like could not handle.
No way.
Yeah. And I didn't think my daughter was that bad.
Yeah.
But here we are.
But here we were.
I feel like for me, if I've ever noticed like commenting on my parenting, it's usually from younger parents, and then I'm just like, oh well. You think you know things now, and I remember being a young mom and thinking, oh, my kids won't do this and this and this. Yeah. But it seems like I've just kind of, like Gina said, I kind of stopped caring. But in the interim, again, it's knowing your own kids, because what another mom does for her, naughty teenager or little toddler that lies, is so different than what everybody else can do for their kids. Like it doesn't work for everybody. So I do remember in particularly responding to a neighbor, not really commenting negatively, but just kind of observing. And and I remember having to like say some good things about my child and saying, well, they're really awesome at this one thing, or they're far beyond their years in this other thing or whatever. And I kind of felt like, not that I needed to go to bat or defend them or balance it out, but I just wanted to remind myself like, oh, they're actually pretty awesome. And I don't have to stress about every little thing and worry about the appearances or worry about what everyone else thinks. But, so I mean, but it is nice to be able to go to people and say, I'm struggling with this thing.
Yeah.
But then when you
Yes.
get that feedback that's maybe a little on the negative side, or you feel like it's negative, you got to kind of counteract that or balance it out, or
Well, and I feel like there were certain years in my parenting where I did a lot of looking left and right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
yeah.
where it was kind of seeking that, even like
Am I doing this
seeking
right?
those opinions.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Well, I think you
I'm
need
making good
it.
choices, right, guys?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
I read a lot of parenting books. I
yes.
mean, to be honest.
But I think over time I found, there's actually still a place for that, right? Seeking, like you're saying, we're struggling with this, or what are your thoughts? But there's always a moment for me where it's looking kind of upward and inward, right? Where I just seek that peaceful feeling of this may not make sense to anybody else. And sometimes that even means it's the right thing for me. But having that kind of inner peace allows me to maybe more graciously say, oh, what a great idea. And that seems to be working really well in your family. For us, and being willing to find that peace in you do you, and we're doing us the best we can, really imperfectly, but I'm trying to, listen to that inner voice.
Oh, I think that's super important to trust your mom gut, you know? Because, I mean, in my experience, it's usually right.
Yeah.
And it's usually telling you what's best for your own child, for sure. I think that's super important.
I always felt this need to protect my kids from criticism.
Yes.
And which is impossible. And, you can't do, but I remember my kids being smaller and I was a lot more sensitive to, well, how are the other kids treating them? How are the other parents treating them and the teachers? What do they really think? And like trying to shield them from that. Because I felt like that was my job as a mom. And I think I learned in heartbreaking ways that you can't protect them. Like, I really did think like, yeah, you can say, like, I got to the point, I think, pretty early on of like, yeah, I don't care how other people feel. But I did. It was just in a different way. I felt it was how everyone felt about my kid, not my parenting.
Sure.
So I think we all have sort of a sensitive spot. My oldest son, Miles, had a teacher who didn't like him. And I remember he would come home and say things. He was really nervous about it. And
Of course.
of course. And we were trying to figure it out. And in my mind, I was like, well, of course, an elementary school teacher loves all of her students. That's not true. And I remember we went to a parent-teacher conference and we saw her interacting with Miles. And my husband and I were like, oh, she doesn't. And that's and it was so weird. And we were like, do you take him out? Do like all that kind of stuff, that kind of judgment where she's like, well, he just did it. He just, and it wasn't about anything it was just like oil and water. Like, I don't know what it was or whatever. And we talked to Miles about it. And I remember asking him like, yeah, she stresses us out. Like, if you want to move in classes, like, absolutely. And he was so, and if you know him now as an adult, he was like that as a little kid. And he goes, you know what? I just learned early on, this is him in 5th grade. I just learned early on that, not everyone's going to like you. And, oh, well, nothing you can do about it. No big deal. He was 0% like worried about it. But that made me excuse myself from the dinner table and cry in the bathroom because I'm like, he's okay with. He knows. Yeah. He found out. Not everyone's gonna like.
But it's so smart. His
but
reaction.
He was fine. Yeah. He was like, no, I've got friends in there. It's not. She wasn't abusive or anything. Right. It was just she didn't think that he was
as wonderful as
precious.
You did.
Well, and as wonderful as he is.
As he is.
Yeah. Seriously.
As he is. Anyway, but that was an interesting experience for me to see from the outside. Like, you can't protect anybody from that. But boy, if you want to bring out like my intense, fierce mama bear side, then just just say my kids are okay. Or or that you don't like. Like, I will go nuts.
Yeah, we can take what you want to say about how we interact with our kids, whatever, it's fine. But yeah, don't say anything about the actual children.
Yeah. In my experience, I have loved to hear my friends talk about my children because I feel like I get critical of them, and I feel I probably subconsciously, am caring like how they're presented to the world. I try not to, make my kids a reflection of me, but like sometimes you feel that way. But when I hear other people, like friends that know them and love them, talk about them, I'm like, go on,
I know. And on the flip side, nothing makes you feel so like.
And I really appreciate that. I mean, I feel like we were just with a friend we haven't seen for years the other night. And he was like, your daughter is amazing. And she's this and that. And I'm like, and I found myself going, oh, well, it's been rough. But he's right. And I appreciate the love my friends have for my children because it helps me relax and say, you know what? I just need to love them like that. And it will work out. And as long as our relationship is good, like I don't have to stress as much, but it's hard to get there.
It's hard to get there. And how do you react then when someone is making a comment about your parenting, or your relationship with your kid, and it's not somebody you can just brush off or, go to the next grade. It's somebody in your family. It's somebody who's close to you. How does that change what's appropriate or what's helpful? I guess helpful is what I mean of to do or say.
It's rough. When my oldest was littler and all my nieces and nephews were closer in that age, like early teens and stuff, I can remember my parents and my mother-in-law making comments about everything, really. I mean, they weren't hypercritical, but I can remember having to explain, we're living in a different world now. We have problems you never even could have wrapped your mind around, and being kind of confused on the way we did things and why we said yes to some things and no to other things. And you do have to remind, especially older generations, that this is not like the 80s. This is not like the 70s and the 90s. We are living in a futuristic world with really weird problems that we never, even our first generation of kids with smartphones, right? We're the first moms to ever have kids with smartphones. Our parents could not have even managed any of this, And so it's, I think that's appropriate, right? To nicely remind people hey, there are so many things I have to micromanage that you never even thought of. So
I think something else that's helpful too, depending on what side of the family it's coming from and the situation that you have with your spouse, if you're married, comments, it's kind of like you take care of your side of the family and I take care of my side of the family, but, and you have a united front. I mean, that's something.
That's a good tip though.
Yeah.
It is a tip. Yeah.
I think because you have, with your family, you have that history of, growing up in your family of origin and knowing how that communication happens within your family. Because even within the families that, you each come from, there's a culture there. And so there's things, that people will say and not say about different things. And so, so you want the native from that culture to speak back to the savages, right?
In that language.
In that language. No, I really have no complaints. But it's interesting because there are just, and it's not even necessarily criticisms. It's just there's different ways to do things. Mm-hmm. And so, I think too, when a family comes together, the dad brings things from their family and the mom brings things from their family. And then we kind of have to decide, okay, what are we going to do for our family? And I think if you remember that and then have a united front in parenting, obviously, the children know if there's divisions, then that just helps make it so much easier and better to deal with those kind of things when you've already thought through, this is what we're doing. This is how our family's going to deal with these things.
I think if you can let yourself to be relaxed enough in those moments to make it light and funny.
I was just gonna say
that has worked for
go-to.
me. I remember my mom making a comment. I don't even know what she said, but it was something about parental supervision, right? And watching the kids. And my sister was there with me, and we were like, Mom, what are you talking about? You worked full time our whole lives, and you left us home all day long in the summer, and we went swimming in our pool with no adults there. All day long we just swam, and we would jump off the roof into the pool, and there were injuries, and so, and she was like, I did not. And we were like, Mom, we know you're aging, but your memory is fully intact, and she was kind of trying to downplay that was not safe. And that was, it was fine. And it was the 80s. We all were alone, and a lot of us were latchkey kids, and it was totally
no helmets.
Yeah, right. No helmets, no car seats, all the things. And she was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that. Yeah, I did do that. And she realized okay, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. And kids are, sometimes raise themselves in some ways, and that's all right. That's not bad. And
I think there's a larger issue too when someone is interpreting your parenting, right? Yeah. It's and I love that I'm using the word interpreting your parenting because they're just judging you.
They're judging
But I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, but I obviously have a bias of that. And so I appreciate that. You really are bringing up points of how to make it better, right? How to not only deflect it, but get to that point where you're it doesn't affect me, right? So, and I love these conversations and they go by so quickly. But in the last little remaining time we have, I want to ask one more question and just kind of go around because we cannot control other people. We can only control ourselves. Is there something that you do consciously now as an adult to make it easier to be less judgmental, to interpret more generously for others the way that they parent? And what is it?
I love that question. I mean, it just makes me think about how I interact with everyone around me and giving people that grace to be who they are and trust that they're living their best lives. But one thought that I had is I think there are certain situations that can't be avoided, right? There's people at the grocery store who maybe say something or in a neighborhood, you can let that go. But when it is those relationships where it's lasting and it's stickier, I think sometimes it's a combination of both grace for that person, seeking to understand where they're coming from, and then also maybe preemptively just stating our own truths and holding to them regardless of how it's received. And I think that's something that Rich, my spouse, and I have tried to do is in those sticky situations, maybe it's a preemptive email that's sent that says, this holiday, here are some of the things that we will be doing.
That's smart.
Or we will be attending this and this, but can't make it this night. Or anyway, those stickier things I think sometimes do involve tricky communication and seeking to reinvent what's the best way in those situations that don't necessarily just disappear.
Yeah.
Having 3 kids in 3 different decades of my life has given me a lot of different perspective. I had a baby in my 20s, a baby in my 30s, a baby in my 40s. And they're all so different. My daughter now is an adult and she was a very hard teenager. And then we have a very severely disabled son who's 16, nonverbal, diapered, all the things, seizures, and then a second grader. So I'm seeing all these different,
You've got
a
some
lot of different
perspective.
perspective. And so I always remember my own situation when I'm interpreting other people's parents.
Yes.
AKA judging and rolling my eyes at people. When I see a meltdown, even if the kid isn't a toddler, if it's a teenager meltdown, in my mind, I'm like, gosh dang it, mama, you're doing the best you can. And I will offer help sometimes in those situations if I feel like it's, appropriate. But it's helped me to really not judge other people so much because I feel like we've been through it all. And everyone around me, I mean, my close inner circle people know, but the people that don't, know what's going on inside the walls of our house, they have no idea. All the other things we're dealing with that aren't just disability, or a rebellious teenager. There's so much more going on. And that I know that's true for everyone. Yeah. It's not just our family. Everybody else has so many things that they're dealing with that are like sometimes life and death situations. And we don't know. So if we think some mom is being a loser and not doing right by her kids, we don't know what we're talking about because no one really does. But, you have to remember that when you're looking around, right? And think, everybody's got their stuff, man. We're all just doing the best we can, and we all need help. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think both of you made great points. I mean, you just try to realize other people are doing what you're doing, which is you're just trying to do your best. And I think as I've gotten older and I go to the grocery store without my children and I see a mom with a couple little babies or something, I'll say something.
You're that. Mom.
I'm that old lady now.
Yep.
That will be like, nice job, way to go. Or I'll be on a walk and there'll be somebody, pulling on toddlers and on a hike the other day. We saw this. We left the trailhead, me with my mostly adult children. And then next to us was a family starting with a baby in a backpack, another one, a couple more in hands, and then, a 7-year-old. And it was so funny. On the way back, we never saw him again.
Yeah.
And I thought
They disappeared into the woods.
They didn't make it very far.
But they tried.
But every time that I see somebody like that, I always say, or we've gone skiing and I see somebody, trying to put little kids in ski clothes. I'm sorry. It's
so
just
hard.
such a nightmare.
I didn't do it.
But we did that growing up. And I always tell them, hey, this will pay off.
Yeah.
This will pay off when you do it. And so I think just being a little bit, in addition to all the wonderful things you said, giving each other grace and everything, being a little bit of a cheerleader for each
Yeah,
other.
for sure.
I think that helps, and hopefully it just makes them think a little bit about, yeah, this is going to get easier and it's worthwhile now.
Yeah.
For sure.
The last thing that I want to say is that when I catch myself judging, and I do because I'm human, I think, Elise, if you have time to judge, you have time to help. So unless you're willing to put, to meet somebody where the rubber, hits the road, then, roll up your sleeves then and get to work. And there is a lot that we can do to help each other. So,
Agreed.
so I think that's the best way, because then it creates empathy. You go, oh yeah, that's not the situation I thought. That's hard. Yeah. It's hard.
Yeah.
We need to help each other. Less judging, more helping.
That's right.
I like that's where we've gotten to.
Yes.
Thank you for joining the Council of Moms. I hope that you will create your own Council of Moms to be able to talk through a lot of these real issues. And we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Council of Moms. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Find us on any of the podcast platforms. And if you have a question for the Council of Moms, please leave a comment for us on The Lisa Show on Instagram or Facebook.